So thank you so much for joining us for the official launching of the WEPs Global Survey Report 2025. My name is Miwa Park, and I'm the WEPs Coordinator at Women's Empowerment Principles Global Secretariat at UN Women. So before we kick off, we'd like to thank each and one of the WEPs signatory that has spent time to answer our survey. Without your inputs, we would not have been able to put together this timely report that highlights important areas of work when it comes to the implementation of gender equality and women's empowerment. To start today's session, we will hear some introductory remarks from Anna Fels. She's the head of the WEPs Global Secretariat here at UN Women. And then I'll take over the stage to present the summary of the report. Then I will introduce very special guests of today to reflect on their perspective of the report. Then we will hear from them and conclude with a Q&A session. This is a kind reminder that we are offering AI-generated translation for today's webinar. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button that says Show Caption, and you can turn it on and off, choose your language. But if you have any question, I'll share how to turn that on in the chat. Next, please share your questions to the panelists in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. You can do this throughout the webinar, and if you'd like to communicate with other participants, please use the chat function, and I see that everyone is nailing it already. And also, I want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, and later it will be uploaded to weps.org website to be shared with the general public. Now, to get us started, I'd like to invite Anna to deliver her opening remarks. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Miwa, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you to the launch of the 2025 WEPs Global Survey Report. This is the first comprehensive effort that we have made to hear from the global WEPs network, and it coincides with 15 years of WEPs in the making so far, and we have reached about 12,000 CEOs that have signed up their companies to be part of this effort to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment in around 184 countries. So basically almost global. So first of all, as Miwa was saying also, we would like to thank everyone that participated and contributed to the report by sharing progress, lessons learned, challenges in advancing gender equality. Your honest reflections and thoughtful recommendation will be instrumental in shaping our collaboration efforts for the next few years. So thank you so much for your commitment and for your leadership. The report gives us a panoramic view, as we will see in Miwa's presentation, on where businesses stand today on the implementation of the WEPs, what they have achieved, where they're struggling, and where they will go next. We see encouraging ambition, and we will learn more about it today. Many companies are embedding gender equality into values, culture, and leadership. Many are putting in place workplace practices to foster a gender-inclusive workplace. Congratulations, everyone. Yet, we are finding persistent gaps, especially in areas critical to creating lasting impact. And I will just focus on the two main ones from my perspective in these opening remarks today. We will also hear from our partners that are joining us that might add additional ones, and we also expect you to participate in the chat in the Q&A function. But the first one is the lack of rigorous data tracking. Yet we know that it helps get things done. Without data commitment to gender equality remains a statement of intent, and tracking progress turns commitments into accountability. It also drives continuous improvement. It helps us see what is working and what is not, and where the gaps are. It builds credibility and trust. It signals integrity to employees, investors, consumers, regulators, and other stakeholders. It reveals hidden inequalities. And I think this is a very important point. It reveals hidden inequalities. If you're not tracking data, how would you know where the inequalities are? And data helps uncover structural bias that often get unnoticed. And finally, on this point with data tracking, it fosters a culture of accountability. Data becomes a catalyst for internal reflection and collective responsibility for change. So I'd like for all of you to think about this and how you can make a difference. The second gap that we have seen with the report is limited uptake of procurement practices that promote sourcing from women-owned and gender-responsive businesses. At the same time, we know that it transforms supply chains into engines of equality. When suppliers begin implementing the WEPs, the action and impact of one company's effort multiplies across dozens or hundreds, or for some companies, hundreds of thousands of others. So think about how your suppliers can become your engines of equality and your partners to drive this change. It creates systems by doing so, not isolated change. When company buys responsibly, it sends signals across its ecosystem, influencing peers, investors, industry standards, and public policy. This collective momentum transforms gender equality from an internal policy goal to a market norm, embedding inclusion in the DNA of the economic systems. So in the next hour, you will hear from our partners that will give their perspectives on the findings of the report that Miwa will present. And I invite all of you to engage by asking questions and sharing your own reflections. Together, let's turn the insight from this report into a roadmap for bolder, more accountable, more inclusive business transformation. So thank you so much to everyone, and I wish you a productive and inspiring session. Thank you, and back to you, Miwa.
Thank you so much, Anna. So before I go into present the findings of the key the report, I'd like to launch a quick poll to see who have read the survey, read the report, and who has responded to the survey. So now the poll is live, so you'll be able to see that. Okay, so wow, I'm surprised to see that quite of the attendees have responded to the survey already. And some already have read the report. So thank you so much for spending your time to look into the findings. And today, what we would like to do is really summarize and present key findings so you can have some takeaway for your businesses and operations as well. While we are waiting, again, as Anna mentioned, this year marks the 15 years of the Women's Empowerment Principles, which is the largest global framework and platform for private sector action for gender equality. So to date, we have almost 12,000 participating companies, and CEOs have committed to embarking on a journey to advance gender equality and women's empowerment through gender responsive governance and leadership, accountability, and workplace, marketplace, and community. So as a global champion for gender equality, UN Women has been working closely with the WEPs signatories to create more and better jobs for women, foster inclusive supply chains, as Anna mentioned, and empower communities for bold corporate accountability. With that backdrop, I'm going to stop the poll, and we can see that around 35% of the participants have responded to the survey. So thank you so much. And we see that quite a few have read the report, but a majority didn't have a chance to read the report. So I hope you get inspired by today's summary and spend some time to read and really delve into the key findings of the report today. So moving on, the survey was designed to better understand, firstly, how web signatory companies have operationalized their web's commitment. Secondly, to capture insight on their progress, challenges, motivations, and future priorities in engaging with the webs. In addition, we were also curious about the future priorities of the web signatories. Ultimately, we have launched the survey to strengthen UN Women's offering to the private sector and to inform the strategic direction of the WEPs initiative, including through the continuous improvement of the resources and tools, and for UN Women team to meet the evolving needs of businesses worldwide. So we have designed the survey into 6 main sections, looking into different pillars of the WEPs, from corporate governance and leadership, workplace marketplace, community, to transparency and accountability. And we have added training elements for the marketplace and community. So those pillars have included Principle 4 in their questions. So then we also added some questions to assess the level of engagement of the respondents with the WEPs initiative and their feedback. And we have offered the survey into 12 different languages beyond UN official languages, reflecting the Secretariat's commitment to foster participation from diverse backgrounds, from linguistic and cultural backgrounds. So over 800 private sector entities have responded to the survey, and the profiles of the survey respondents are representative of the broader WEPs network. Looking at it from the geographic perspective, firstly, we have received responses from 118 countries around the globe, literally from every corner of the world. And the top 5 responses came from where we have the largest WEPs signatories present, namely Turkey, Brazil, Mexico, Italy, and Argentina and India with the same number of responses. Looking at it from industry and sector perspective, we have more than 50 industries and sectors represented in the survey. We had the highest number of responses from the financial institution and banks, then food, including producers and retailers, software and IT services, education and training, consulting, and other business services. Yet, as you can see in the chart on the screen, other industries mark almost 2/3 of the responses, showing how diverse the respondents were. Moving on, looking at the size and the ownership of the companies, we have diverse size of the companies from small enterprises to large multinationals represented. It's important to note that 3 out of 5 respondents were from SMEs, and almost half of the responses came from women-owned and led businesses. So there are common myths still that companies work on gender equality due to moral and ethical motive. But the findings of the report reinforce the WEP's catchphrase, gender equality means better business. According to our data, most of the companies are joining the WEPs for business-related motives, and less so from moral and ethical motivations, in fact. So majority of the companies have joined the WEPs to advance gender equality across their operations, and they joined to align with global good practices and to strengthen corporate culture and enhance employee engagement, among other business-related reasons. Now that we have taken a look at the background and some context of the survey design and respondents, I'll move on to highlight the key findings. So analyzing this data we gather pointed us to a dual reality. While gender parity in overall employment is increasingly common, women still remain underrepresented where power and influence are concentrated in positions of leadership, when they're being promoted, and in board, which actually aligns with a key message from a webinar we did a couple of years ago on gender parity. There are persistent pay gaps based on gender, and promotions are happening unevenly for different gender. We also found the lack of systematic tracking of data across critical areas, as Anna mentioned, in areas such as gender pay gap, promotion rate, and etc. The report, in a nutshell, revealed these 4 critical points. First, companies are strong on building an inclusive culture and fostering on governance. They understand the importance of having leadership's buy-in for sustainable follow-through of the agenda, and they invest putting more women in senior leadership. Second, companies start with ad hoc activities, then over time build an action plan. So some tend not to have a dedicated team, resources to put into gender equality work. And also when it comes to data, we found that there's lack of accountability and tracking and reporting, leading the companies blinded on what they're actually doing, where they're heading, and if there's making any progress to contribute to result. To say this in other words, key to making meaningful progress is having an action plan with dedicated team and budget, accountability, and transparency. Closing the gaps we just took a look in the previous slide will require more robust and transparent data collection to help organizations understand where they are on the gender equality journey so that they can foster strengthen accountability for progress and results. Third, as Anna mentioned, while companies are focusing on advancing gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace and even in community, marketplace is still the missing pillar across the board. I'll go to the details of this gap when I go by pillar. Lastly, mid-sized companies seem to be struggling the most. They're too large to be flexible, but yet too small to have some systems in place. So with this broad summary in mind, let me walk you through some of the areas of strength and room for improvements by each pillar. So what did the respondents say? In pillar one, when it comes to governance and leadership pillar, companies were doing well in embedding gender equality into their value and culture. This is a foundational step for companies to begin their WEPs journey, and we were happy to see that the foundational step has been well established. While the buy-in is there, the more formal governance and accountability structure appears less developed. Companies could do better when it comes to setting measurable gender equality targets and tracking progress, and broader efforts to embed gender equality into value and workplace culture could have more concrete performance metrics and tracking mechanisms. The second pillar, workplace. Companies understand the importance of integrating gender equality into their workplace, and they're increasingly taking meaningful steps from inclusive hiring, ensuring safety and harassment at work, and providing training for women's career development. But at the same time, we have found a sizable room for improvement in this pillar. The first area we identified was the gender pay gap. We did see a large share of companies responding that they have been putting efforts to review and address disparities in pay, bonuses, and benefits, but these actions still lag behind in other workplace reforms, suggesting that the pay equity remains one of the most complex and under-addressed aspects of gender equality. Secondly, support towards care responsibilities were lacking. While the care duty for women at home remains a foundational obstacle for women's full participation into the workplace, not many companies incorporated this reality into their policies and practices. Majority of the care work at home still falls within women's hands, and in order for women to be able to work, more support is needed toward alleviating their care responsibilities at home. In addition, companies were lagging to provide safety measures outside of office when the employees are commuting to and from work, for instance, and providing gender equality trainings that are more issue specific and deeper. Moving on, I'm highlighting the marketplace where we found a major gap and room for improvement. Companies are already working on gender responsive marketing and human rights due diligence in their value chain, yet not many companies are working to advance gender equality in the supply chain, as Anna has mentioned. Having a standalone gender inclusive supply chain policy was not a common practice, and few companies are engaging with their suppliers and collecting data on their suppliers with gender equality criteria or gender lens. This is an important gap to highlight as companies have the power to drive change in their business ecosystem through engaging with their supply chain. Moving on to the next pillar, community. Many companies are already supporting local communities. However, gender equality could be incorporated more specifically when it comes to evaluating risks and results of the engagement together with the community that they're operating in. The last pillar, measurement and transparency, is another pillar we found a significant gap compared to the other pillars. While companies understand the importance of data collection and tracking, companies seem to have challenges making it into a practice. They need clearer guidance on what to report, how to report, and tools to support them, as well as practical incentives of spending resources on measuring and reporting gender data. We also gathered quotes from the respondents, and here is a mini word cloud that we generated using their voices. While some may approach WEPs and gender equality activities as a checkbox or tick box exercise, the WEPs signatories called it transforming culture of how they operate. In that cultural transformation, having a strong leadership buy-in and inclusive policy mattered. Gathering data and reporting progress matters. And a reminder that advancing gender equality is not only a topic of importance for huge MNCs, but also for small and medium-sized enterprises, and many are already on board. And through analyzing the survey data, we learned about how the web signatories are progressing in different pillars of the web's transformation in their culture and how they operate internally and externally. So we'd like to thank the signatories again for filling in the survey and sharing their honest feedback. Well, that may have sounded like a closing remark of my presentation, but I do have one last slide for you. Our response from UN Women to the web signatories. So web signatories had two main asks. Firstly, they asked for stronger local engagement on webs. So this is worth noting because many signatories did join the webs to be part of this global network of like-minded community. To address their request, our team have shared the survey result with corresponding UN Women country offices. We have around 60 countries around the globe that has a programmatic activities with WEPs components, and WEPs focal point network in UN Women is with over 100 UN Women colleagues, and we are brainstorming together on how to strengthen our engagement with WEP signatories at the local level. And where UN Women Country Office is not present, unfortunately, the HQ is planning virtual engagement for continuous support. We also heard for need for more practical and tailored tools. As mentioned throughout my presentation, we have found significant gaps in the supply chain and reporting. We're currently focusing on developing resources to create tools for strengthening web signatories' capacity in the marketplace in gender responsive procurement and monitoring and reporting through updating our transparency and accountability framework. So please stay tuned and thank you. And I'd like to now, I hope you learned from my key highlights and take your time to really fully go through the findings of the report. And it has lots of data. Can give you some inspiration on where you need to focus on and how to move forward. And again, UN Women is here to support your WEPs journey, and the Secretariat is always open. And now I'd like to move on to the fireside chat portion of the session to hear reflection from experts on different topics. So to hear from the importance of the data perspective, we have invited Anthony Miller. He is the Chief Coordinator of UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative. Anthony is a specialist on sustainable finance, corporate sustainability, and corporate governance. He has managed the SSE initiative since its launch by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in 2009. Today, the SSE counts over 130 partner exchanges around the world. He is a regular contributor to UNCTAD's flagship World Investment Report and World Investment Forum. To hear from women's leadership perspective, we have invited Anita Vivo. She is a corporate governance officer from IFC. She leads IFC's Women on Boards and Business Leadership Program, an initiative embedded within IFC's corporate governance team, supported by the government of Luxembourg, aligned with the World Bank Group's Gender Strategy 2024-2030. She is a corporate she has over 20 years of experience as a certified public accountant, having worked in various US multinational corporations. Lastly, to hear from equal pay perspective, we have invited Aurelian Jolie, communication manager from Equal Salary Foundation. He is a communication professional dedicated to advancing gender equality and workplace. He facilitates the UN Global Compact's Target Gender Equality Program in Switzerland. He promotes fair pay and equal opportunities worldwide. He's passionate about the power of communication. He works to build more inclusive, diverse, and equitable organizations. I will hand it over the stage to Anna and three incredible panels today to share their insights. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Miwa, and thanks for a great overview of the report. I think we can close down that one. So I'm extremely curious to hear from each of our guests today on what surprised you with this report? Was there any surprises, or was it exactly what your assumptions were if we were to do this report? what was new to you and what confirmed what you already did. And maybe Anthony, we can start with you. We've done some research together, and maybe the findings are very much in line with what you've been doing. But anything that surprised you that was sticking out from the report,
Uh,
Anthony?
sure. Thanks, Anna. And it's great to be with you here today, and thanks to Miwa for that great presentation. I think it's a really excellent report. I wouldn't say so much as a surprise, but for us, it is a very much a different perspective because the research we've been doing with you and Miwa, UN Women, and IFC that we've been publishing for the past year, where we're looking in detail at metrics, guidance, standards in this area on gender equality, we're very much looking at the part of the iceberg that's above the water. So we are looking at the visible corporate reporting. We're looking at the recommendations of stock exchanges. We're looking at the recommendations of standard setters. And we've also been going through financial gender equality themed financial products to look at whether their methodology, like what do they look at? So all of this stuff is publicly available information, and it takes a lot of work to comb through it all, but it's all out there. So what I thought was really fascinating about this report is because it is generated by web signatories, and you had a very high response rate from around the world, and people really give you some insights into what's going on inside the report. I've been following the chat today so far, and there's been I know a few people who've talked a little bit about their experience filling out the report. So I think that for me, it's not so much a surprise because I never had any preconceived notions of what they would say, but it's just nice to see that part of the iceberg that's under the water to say, okay, what is it like inside the company trying to implement these things? So I think that has been very illuminating and very important. One of the things when we look at issues of corporate reporting, we have to understand that corporate reporting, it's those things that come out of the company, but there has to be a lot of work inside the company to even get to that point. First of all, there's the awareness that you need to report on certain things or that you want to report on certain things. There's the collection of the data, ensuring that that's a quality exercise there. And then it's also the use of the data in-house. Um, all across sustainability reporting, so beyond just reporting on gender equality, it's not enough just to report stuff. I mean, there are a lot of companies that have great financial reports that are going bankrupt. That's not the point. Yes, it's step one, but the real step is what do you do with that information? So again, your report, it provides this glimpse inside organizations, and I think it's very important not only to report in line with the WEPs. I mean, that's WEPs principle 7 is to report on things, but it's really how you use these things, use this information and implement these principles inside the organization. So I think that's what we were most excited about to see, since we're so focused on public markets, public information, to see this kind of glimpse behind the curtain. That's what really interested us.
Thank you, Anthony. I really like your visual of the iceberg and all the public reporting that you are going through in your work and the WEPs, particularly since we had a high response rate from SMEs, is the kind of under the waterline under the water that we don't otherwise see that much of. So again, I really would like to thank those today that actually did take the time to respond to the survey. And also thanks for recognizing all the work that goes in and reading through all of the responses. It's clear that people are struggling. They have maybe one person, or they might have a small team that are trying to do this. So we also recognize that this is not easy work, and to get to the point that you actually have something to say about it, it's a lot of credit to everyone. Anita, anything that surprised you, or anything that kind of was sticking out for you that surprised you or confirmed what you already knew?
I think one of the most, and thank you first, I should say, for inviting me and for doing this global survey. Um, I think the one thing that really was unexpected is the insights that came around the SMEs. Um, the data that was in the report, talking about 60% of the respondents were in fact, half of them women, were SMEs, and women owned, really challenged my own assumption. I think that I have had the impression that WEP signatories were primarily large publicly listed companies. But the global surveys really paints a different picture. And I was inspired actually by that fact. It's a powerful reminder of how SMEs are really creating opportunities for women, even while facing significant resource constraints. And their determination to impact kind of speaks volumes about the role SMEs are playing in building more inclusive and resilient economies, especially in the emerging markets where IFC invests. This insight really also made me pause and reflect on how we can design guidance and tools that support them. And I commend the Global Survey for calling that out. I was very happy to see that. Anthony's shaking his head because we've had discussions about this before. So, and I do have to say it's fantastic to collaborate with UNSSE as well as UN Women on so much knowledge. And so I offer that.
Thank you so much, Anita. And actually, we have already started to think a little bit about those tools. We have been looking at our transparency and accountability framework and see how can we position this for the SMEs. What is the basic that you need to track versus if you grow into and become a more mature company for gender equality, what are then the next steps? So I hope we can also share. We have launched a new survey to really kind of get into the details of that, and we encourage you, everyone, to participate in that one to help you guide what are those KPIs that are fundamental and what are those that could wait until you've grown a little bit more mature, etc. So thank you, Anita. Aurélien, anything from your side? What surprised you? You're working on equal pay, and maybe that is an area that we learned is struggling, but over to you.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me as well. I think it's outstanding work that you've done with the Global Survey, and it's so interesting to have this clear picture at this point in time. And yes, I think it really paints a clear picture is that most companies really believe in gender equality, but far fewer really go to prove it. So there was the high share of SMEs that really, was surprising in the way that they engaged. But for us, I mean, for me, from the Equal Salary Foundation, it's really between values and verification that is still this gap that is still very wide. And we see companies that come that want to actually exceed expectation to, use something as the Equal Salary Certification as a tool to be able to stand out from the crowd and show that they are, putting into practice all of those pillars that the WEPs are preaching and actually measuring. So this is, in a sense, confirming what we already know is that, leadership accountability is a decisive factor. And where top management sets measurable goals, progress follows. And so this is one very, very important aspect is that there's unfortunately too many pledges and not enough action that is tangible and measurable and concrete. Another thing that surprised me was the procurement. That remains the missing piece that Miwa was talking about at the beginning, is that fewer than a third are tracking spending with women-owned businesses. And this shows that equality efforts often stop at internal policies rather than extending to broader economic impact. And finally, we really believe that fair pay, flexible work, career developments are really the basic fundamentals for gender equality, and this is what we should build upon.
Thank you, Aurélien. I think that there's a lot we can build on and a lot we can do to support. And I look forward to also collaborate with all of you in making that happen. So then what are the opportunities for business to step up with action. What do you see, Aurélien? To start with you, and then we go Anita and Anthony. You're muted.
So of course we have to measure, things when we talk about salary. It's about salary analysis. So many companies are convinced that their pay policy, pay grades, pay system is immune to any type of prejudices or biases. And I'm sure they're great, but it's very important to be able to have an external point of view and have an independent audit and salary analysis. So please conduct pay analysis, publish result, pursue independent certification like the equal salary or others, and really insist on this external validation to really turn promise into trust. And I'm very happy to see that something like the EU Pay Transparency Directive that is going to come into action in Europe in June of next year is going to actually force companies to actually do this. So we can see that this is going to be a massive progress in the world of work in Europe, and hopefully this is going to have a rippling effect all around the world. Then it's really about using procurement power, integrate gender criteria into sourcing, really lever that most companies are a lever that most companies are underusing. And really, the word that I always go to is accountability. For me, it's about making leaders accountable, really tying gender goals to leadership performance and pay. What gets measured gets done. It's making sure that gender equality is not a nice to have, little compliance exercise or something that we can, keep for the value page of the website of a company, but something that you actually treat with the respect and the seriousness that it deserves.
Thanks for adding this point. I think that was also a weakness that we saw in our survey report, that not enough managers are being held to account through these annual performance assessments and goals and targets for the year. And that is definitely a clear way to hold people to account. So Anita, what is your perspective in terms of these opportunities to step up?
I would add that from a governance perspective, one clear opportunity that stood out to me in the global survey is the need for stronger collection of and transparent disclosure of human capital data. I know that we've talked about this, particularly under SDG 5, and will throughout this fireside chat discuss the importance of data. It's an area where I think companies can make a real difference. The global survey does a great job at showing that many businesses are tracking indicators related to women's advancement. Formal reporting remains limited, though. And over, what I think the statistic was, only 57% of the participants that were surveyed publicly share their gender-related data. And just 7% use the WEP company profile. And just to also add, I think the data tells such a compelling story. And I think this is reiterating what Anthony shared earlier. It highlights a key area where businesses can drive meaningful impact by not only integrating the gender-related metrics into their sustainability disclosures, but start looking at some of the key indicators, which also have been mentioned about board and leadership composition, pay equity gap, workforce demographics, hiring, promotion, and turnover, and inclusive governance policies. I would add too that, and this is additionally, the board has a clear opportunity to accelerate progress also by requesting regular data-driven updates and actively inquiring about the policies and practices management is implementing. It's important to ask how those initiatives will be executed and monitored, which policies are most strongly linked to measurable progress, and how the company's performance is benchmarked against national and sector-specific standards. I would reiterate again, when companies prioritize transparency and disclosures, they not only show their commitment to inclusive governance, it's a powerful example globally and to industries.
Thank you, Anita. And from my experience, is that there's the step before that one to actually train the board on what gender equality means for their business, because it's not necessarily intuitive, and how it actually translate into a particular company. So I think we need to train them, and then they would understand better that these data-driven updates would be key for them to once they understood that there's a risk highlighted to this, I think we can drive this forward. Anthony, any perspective from your side on the opportunities for business?
Well, there's a few things here. Yeah, I'd like to be positive and talk about the opportunities for business, and it's there. There's a lot of challenges though, and certainly our work has highlighted that. Definitely, it's good for companies to have better reporting on this, but in the absence of real international standards on this, or even consistent guidance from national bodies, then what are companies left to do? The problem is that in some cases, companies can just make up their own metrics. And one of the challenges with making up your own metrics is that consciously or unconsciously, you're going to steer them towards making you look great. In the 1980s, famously, the big American company General Electric, they told all of their divisions, they said, we are not operating in any industry in which we are not in the top 3 leading in the industry. And so every head of every division at General Electric just redefined their market until they were in the top 3. You know, I'm the #1 manufacturer of left-handed golf clubs for people with red hair, right? You know, you just get very specific. And we've seen that with companies. For example, if you talk about women in management, in senior management in companies, that phrase senior management has no standardized meaning. It means anything and everything. And we've literally seen corporate reports where on one page of the report it says, you know, out of our top 5, our 5 senior managers, they're excellent people. You should trust all your investment capital with these 5 guys who've been around forever and they're geniuses. And then 20 pages later in the same report, they'll say, oh, out of our top 100 senior managers, 50% of them are women. And so you can see how that game works. You just keep extending your definition and scope of senior manager until you hit 50%. I've seen people say that to me all the time. They say, oh yeah, 50% of our managers are women. It's like, really? How do you define managers? So that's one challenge, is standardization. That affects both how you deal with these things internally, but also how you report these things. And I don't have a happy, easy answer to that. A lot of the work that we've done together has been to challenge international sustainability standard setters to say they don't have consistent metrics in the space. Part of the problem is that gender equality is a cross-cutting issue. And so it's one of those things that's everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Like nobody has a chapter of their sustainability report that just says gender equality, but maybe they should. I mean, the climate crisis is a cross-cutting issue. It affects everything, but there's still a section of a sustainability report that says climate. So I think that's a challenge, and so I do sympathize with any companies on this call who say, well, you know, we're not sure, what have you, and it doesn't mean you can't do anything. There are things out there that you can take guidance from, and you know, you should always try to do the best you can. But I would say that there is also something that needs to be done from standard setters in this space. That's a real challenge. And that comes back to things like, if we're going to sort of tying CEO pay to certain metrics and so on, okay, what are those metrics? And did the CEO make up those metrics themselves? Well, gee, won't it be a surprise if they hit their target every year? You know, so I think these are challenges. You know, and I wish I had easy solutions. I don't, but those are challenges.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for bringing out this. And I also put a link to some of the reports that we've been working on together. So people can also go into the details. And this is also an effort that we are doing. We'll share at the end of the webinar the survey that we are looking at to learn more from you on which are the KPIs you are tracking, depending on your region, your industry, and your size. And with that, we also convening these standard setters to kind of trying to figure out how we can be more helpful and have a more standardized set of indicators. So thanks so much, Anthony, for bringing this up. My next question is about the risks. I think this is a very important point. The risks for companies that ignore the findings that we are discussing today, whether they're linked to these trends, challenges, or gaps. Anita, could you get your reflections started on the risks?
Absolutely. Obviously, we've talked about data as a risk. I think decision making without data-driven decisions can be made in the dark on assumptions, losing transparency and missing opportunities for sustainable growth and improvement. I think there's also, we've talked about the risk of falling short on the sustainability goals under SDG 5, but also in general. And I think Anthony raises an excellent point on the standard setters needing more guidance and more, I would say, collaboration on the forefront. And then I would also add to that, there's from a business perspective, there's a huge risk of missing out on real market opportunities and economic growth. Right? The WEPs survey shows that supply chains and the procurement practices that actively foster the participation of women, along with inclusive marketing, unlock new customer segments and drive data innovations. And I think that the companies that are investing in their human capital to advance opportunities for women could gain a real edge in attracting investment, partnerships, and outperforming competitors. And I think there's also the component that considers how credit rating agencies will review companies for purposes of their sustainability goals and for investment.
Thank you so much, Anita. We'll move to Anthony. We talked a little bit about the risks, but anything else that you'd like to elaborate here?
A couple of points. One, just to pick up on that last point about credit rating agencies, Anita, it's a great point. And as you know, we just published a report on gender-themed financial products where we're looking at the methodology behind them. And of course, one of the problems there is it's the same thing that we find in the area of corporate reporting is that you have lots of variations on these kinds of things, and that's a challenge. And this is where we always use the WEPs as a standardized benchmark and framework, and we think that the standard set corporate reporting standard setters and the financial service providers should also be doing something like that as well. Otherwise, yeah, and we're not saying that there should not be different ideas and different approaches. We don't want to have a monoculture situation here, but I think all of these things are interconnected. Another thing that was brought up earlier, but I didn't get a chance to comment on, and I think it does relate to this issue of risk, Anna, and that is board literacy on this topic. So it's, there are all these things facets within a company. It's collecting information and it's managing the results after the fact. It's publicly reporting these things, but in that whole process, and as part of that, when you produce a public report, usually before it goes out the door and it's published, somebody needs to put it on the table in the boardroom, and the board members need to react to it. And one of the things that we see, and we see this in the area of climate and other areas, if board members don't know enough about the topic, they just don't say anything at all, or worse, they diminish it and say it's not important. That's like it's like a fundamental human psychology. People who don't know anything about anything, you can either raise your hand and say, I'm completely ignorant on this topic. What should I do or think? Or you just say, oh, it's not important. And most people, especially board members, are unwilling to admit that they're ignorant on a topic. I mean, we saw this 15 years ago in the financial crisis. I mean, the Lehman Brothers, that was not their plan after 100 years to go bankrupt overnight just because board members didn't know advanced math. But there we are. And so how many other things people are getting caught off guard simply because they don't understand the topic. So this is something I think it's an internal risk. I mean, all of these things, when you talk about these various reports, Anna, about opportunities in the marketplace and so on, recognizing those opportunities requires eyes that see them and a mind that understands them. And so I think this is something that, certainly we've had some conversations behind the scene about how we can do more in this area about increasing board literacy on this topic.
Thank you, Anthony. Anita, I see that you have your hand open, so I think maybe you want to respond immediately to Anthony before I give the word to Aurelia.
I want to compliment what Anthony is saying. And those side conversations are well appreciated. I think that this is an opportunity for our organizations to step up and build capacity. And I think it's an interesting way to look at the stakeholder engagement of the core issue that we're trying to solve for. That's all I wanted to say.
Great. Thank you, Anita. We look forward to collaborate and see what we can do together to make that shift. Aurelia.
Yeah, I also want to respond to Anthony, because I think,
Of
of course, at the end of the day, the board is the one in charge, and this is the one, pushing buttons and making decisions. And when we talk about board literacy and ignorance about topics, I have to go back to what I was saying before. It's about accountability. If you're not accountable, if there is no motivation for you to actually act upon something, you're necessarily not going to do anything about it, because there's so much that you have to deal with. So if this is tied to your performance, tied to the performance of your company, and again, taken with seriousness, this is something that is being treated seriously and is no longer a risk, but it's an opportunity. And because if people actually overlook this issue and think that, oh, this is great, it's just another report about the way that gender equality is slowly but very, very, very slowly improving around the world, then they're never going to be able to actually harvest the benefit that they could have if they actually did anything about it very seriously, comprehensively. So I think there is a few risks that needs to be taken into account. Is the reputational risks. We've seen how it can really damage a company that doesn't take this seriously. The world is moving towards transparency, and those without data or proof of action can appear complacent. They're not doing anything about it, so they don't care. And then there is the talent risk. We see this as one of the major factors that companies really want to actually get certified and treat this issue seriously of equal pay. In our case, is that employees, especially younger generations, expect fairness and evidence. And companies that can't demonstrate this will lose credibility as employers. I think symbolic policies without results erode eventually trust internally. So staff are not fooled by glossy messages. They clearly see when equity is just a slogan. And then there's the risk of compliance. With more pay transparency laws, like I was talking about UPTB previously emerging, being unprepared and will have legal and operational consequences. So one day or the other, they will have to look at it seriously. At management level, at CEO level, and at board level. So those risks are going to become real opportunities. So this is, I guess, a positive spin outlook on this.
Thank you so much. I'm taking note of the great suggestions, and thanks for laying them out so clearly. I think also as we are advancing in the supply chain, there will be more opportunities if you have visibility around your gender equality work when your buyers are buying your products and services, are asking, what are you doing on gender equality? So it's also to kind of be ahead of the game for many. So thanks so much for that. I've come to the final question from me, and then we're also getting questions in the Q&A function. And please, participants, if you'd like to share your questions, this is a good time before we go into the Q&A. But the final one is like, what kind of support would be needed? And I think we touched a little bit about it already in terms of more standardization of KPIs. We talked about board training and capacity building. We talked about a few things, but what other support could we be providing to private sector entities at this point to help translate the findings of the report into action? I will start with you, Aurélien, and then Anthony and Anita.
So I think there is, first of all, simple practical tools like the WEPs gender gap analysis tool. I'm sure that the companies that are signatories know about this, but it's great for pay analysis, KPIs, and communication that any HR team can use. I think an access to credible validation. We really see this with our certification, that scalable option that officially mark improvement, that reward teams and offer recognition without heavy bureaucracy, that they can, they work towards a milestone and be like, okay, we've done this. Now we can show our team, we can show our stakeholders that we are actually going beyond pledges, but we're actually doing something in our day-to-day operations. And of course, peer learnings and mentorings, having networks where companies can learn from each other and experience, especially in SMEs. So this is why what I think it's extremely important to be able to turn those intention, turns those direction, those resources into measurable validation, like the 7th pillar of the WEPs.
Thank you so much, Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the tools that we've discussed today, I mean, there are, and I think it's important for people to be able to organize their tools. They have, put them on the wall and recognize what tools do what thing. A hammer and a screwdriver are not the same tool. So you have broad frameworks that help you to really, that are sort of foundational for every other tool that you have at your disposal. For example, we're always using the WEPs as the framework for us to analyze disclosure standards, methodology for financial products, et cetera. So different tools do different things. I think, of course, one of the things that we do a lot of work on is market education programs. We work with you on that. We work with IFC on that. And I think that's critical to have these kinds of discussions. But, I'm sure we're not the only ones. I hope we're not the only ones. And for many of the people on this call today, they should be aware that, UN Women is not just a building in New York. You have offices all around the world. So does IFC, and there are opportunities to engage with local offices, particularly to engage on specific topics. We've provided guidance to stock exchanges on how stock exchanges can promote gender equality in their marketplace. So we're working with exchanges around the world. I know a lot of your WEPs signatories are SMEs. Some of them may be listed, some of them may not be, but they can still take advantage of free training sessions that are provided by exchanges in their market and engage with exchanges there. And I think the final thing is for board education. We've certainly seen board members. We've seen entire boards from single companies join our online training sessions. We are, of course, behind the scenes having conversations about new tools specifically for board members. But I always say that the job of a board member is to ask intelligent questions. But you can't ask an intelligent question about a topic you know nothing about. So any amount of education or awareness provided to a board member is already a step in the right direction. And will improve the situation. We don't have to go from 0 to 100 with nothing in between. It's just a question of, can we make the situation we have today better? The final thing I would say is that you can see the kind of reports that we do, women in corporate leadership reports that we're producing every year, where we're ranking entire markets around the world on boardroom gender balance and other facets of women in corporate leadership. These are big macro level studies, but for companies on this call, they need to start thinking about how they can quantify these things inside their organizations. And this is one thing. If you're an SME, hey, the good news is it's easier for you. The bigger the company, the more complex it is to gather internal stats. The smaller the company, the easier it is. And when it comes to gender equality, there's a lot of things about sustainable development that are difficult to quantify. Gender equality is not really one of them. You should be able to quantify these things. You should be able to know what's going on in your workplace, and it will help you to have just better human resource management in your workplace in general, better relationship with external stakeholders, better relationship with investors. So those are just a few thoughts on that.
Thank you, Anthony. Anita, to close this question, and then we will go to the chat, to the Q&A function.
I would begin by saying I agree with everything my colleagues on the call have said. I would add and emphasize the need for collaboration and the need to also look not only internally but externally. And I think the report does a really great job of highlighting the external need that exists, particularly in communities, particularly as Anthony has highlighted, regulators, stock exchanges, standard setters. I think this is an important opportunity. In terms of from my role, in what I am doing and how I also lean into the World Bank Group's gender strategy, I think it's important that we apply this governance lens to look at what internally the companies can do from the board perspective, from management's perspective on policies and practices in managing human capital, and also to the comments that's been made about accountability, helping companies figure out also how to track the data that they are collecting. And I would also add that there are some fantastic tools that IFC has that go to beyond into the sustainability area. It's the Beyond the Balance Sheet tool. And I think that there are a lot of free resources, and Anthony well points out, I think helping guide folks to where they can find those tools is really important too. It can be an overwhelming amount of information. So centralizing it, I think, would be really helpful.
Thank you so much, Anita. I'm looking through here the questions. We have a little bit less than 15 minutes to wrap up. So I would like to, I'm taking the questions that we have now and try to summarize them. One is about equal compensation and how you deal with that as a multinational company where you have economic differences in different countries and continents. So how do you kind of deal with that, and it kind of relates a little bit to Anthony's point that small business, it's easier than the big ones that have more complexities in their reporting. The other one, it comes back to the board education and training, and any more insights on what we think should be in that training and guidance to boards, how they would think about it. I've done board training myself, so I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear from you. There's also a participant that talk about the challenges of purchasing from women-owned business, because in reality, they don't find qualified companies that might be either on the quantity or the quality side of it, might not meet the expectations of a big company. And then we have for SMEs without governance structure in place, and where you have the business owner in charge, how do you deal with these issues that we talked a little bit about when we talked about the governance and training of the different layers? Any insights on that? So let's start with those and then see how much time we get for additional questions as they come in. Anita, would you like to start?
I think let me start with a question that talks about board literacy. Am I on mute? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I think that there are so many angles that can be approached, and I think Anthony well framed it in that just content and context of what we're talking about, right? And how it relates then to the risk, how it relates to policies and practices that can be developed. For instance, what can be done around potentially gender-based violence or care, right? And built into policies and practices. I think that is a key area where you need to strategically map out what it is that boards, and also do a focus group, I would say, what are boards looking for in terms of content, information, and then build a program around it. I think that's important. Anthony?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And I think it's also, when it comes to board members and the kind of training that they need and the kind of skill set that they need, we have to remember that, board members are not managers. They have a different idea. I mean, you have independent board members. They're not there to micromanage every aspect of the company, but they are there to hold management to account. And if you're a listed company, they're there to also be representatives of shareholders. So it's really about intelligent inquiry, and also checking data. Also, there are questions about materiality. Who determines what's material and what's not material? Is that a management determination? Is that a board member determination? If it's a management determination, then it's the board's role to make sure that that's a legitimate determination. So if management says, "Oh yeah, that doesn't matter," well, the board can step in and say, "Well, we think it does matter, and we think you should take it seriously, and we'd like to see you develop some sort of system to address that." So I think on that front, it's really just it's a process, and it's a never-ending process. If you look at financial oversight in companies, it's not like, you could take a board member from like the 1920s, 1940s, 1970s, put them in a modern company. I don't think they do very well. I think they'd have a hard time keeping up. All topics move forward. So if this is not like somebody ticks a box and says they're an expert on this issue, it's a subject of continuous learning, but you have to start from somewhere. So I think that's part of that. I think some of the other questions brought up on multinationals, I'm sure that's something that Aurélien would be more of an expert on. But of course, for every company, you're not talking about equal pay for everybody around the whole planet. You're just talking about within a country where you've got similar cost of living, similar expectations, and so on. And it's really about equal pay between genders, equal pay for equal work. So that, yeah, there's just a few reactions to some of the questions. I think also this thing about for small SMEs where you've got an owner operator, you're saying that without a governance structure in place. I mean, it depends on how small you're getting here. There's no such thing as a listed company without a governance structure. Most unlisted companies also have some kind of governance structure. Even many small family-run businesses, the key word there is family. That family acts as kind of a board in and of themselves. If you have a company that really has one person at the top who's making all the decisions and they are their own oversight, that's a fundamental weakness in that company. If you are on this call and you're an owner operator, you're running your own company, you should seek to have some kind of governance structures. And I know the IFC's done a lot of work on this. We just launched a new guidance for SMEs. And governance structures, you're an owner operator, you don't want anybody to tell you what to do. Fine. You're still the boss. But you can still have people, advisors who give you feedback, give you things to think about. If you think that you're superhuman and you have zero blind spots, then that is already one of your blind spots. You're not. So you would do well to have at least some kind of advisory group of people, even if this is just another, like a collection of other owner operators that you meet with from time to time and share experiences. So that would be just what I would say on that topic.
Thank you, both Anita and Anthony, Aurélien. And I realize we actually the A team. Sorry, Miwa.
No, I mean, I think Anita and Anthony have really covered it very, very, very well. I think it's wonderful that we talked about boards and their responsibility and the way that they can their actions can actually move topics forward. I would like to go back to the fundamentals and that is equal pay, because the boards are on one end and you're paying your salary and the wages on the other hand. I think it's so foundational for gender equality. Before going to a multinational approach to be able to make sure that you have pay equity, I think it's really important to remember just to be able to have a clear documented pay philosophy. If that just one takeaway, if you have a defined policy that explain what fairness, transparency, and gender neutrality is in action in the way that the company works, before going to pledges, before going to values or boards, if you have this in that is set up, you already can actually, it's a good start, I think, to be able to build up to what everything else that the World Empowerment Principle represents, and how far you can go to be able to implement comprehensive gender equality. So thank you very much, everyone, for this very insightful conversation today.
Thank you so much. And also from my side, I would like to highlight that the training that we've done for boards also focused on challenging perceptions and through kind of unconscious bias training to open up the eyes for people that thought they knew what they knew, but might have, as Anthony was also pointing out, blind spots. Like, you need to understand that and we do have, for those that are interested, we have unconscious bias training on our resource collection. But to really understand like that you have blind spots and nobody is a superhero, as Anthony was saying, but that there are areas that you might actually not have thought about. And this kind of unconscious bias training opens your eyes for that. The other element that we've been covering is kind of like how to develop a SWOT analysis from your company. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And don't forget that there are risks and there are opportunities in addressing gender equality. If you're a bank, you might be losing a lot of customers and clients because you haven't thought about those new customer markets that you could tap into, or it could be risk. So I think this conversation today has been really valuable. I would like to thank each and every one. We have a few more minutes before I hand it over to Miwa, but anyone that would like to say a final recommendation or a final word. I see Anita, I think you unmuted yourself, so you might want to say something. And then we will close in a couple of minutes. Anita.
What I would share most, and I think it is a theme that has been discussed, is accountability, right? Well-intended plans need to be measured, and that is the CPA in me. I want to see an outcome. And I think you can test outcome at management level, at board level, and also in the culture, in the people's surveys around engagement. And I would add to that, I think that there's a great internal focus. I think companies also can leverage from peer learning and work in a broader external context. And I think this really can be a competitive advantage to attracting talent.
Thank you, Anita. Aurelia?
Absolutely. You couldn't have said it better, Anita. I think this is really, at the end of the day, accountability. Like, what are you doing this for? Are you doing this for, a shiny annual report where you've actually tried to measure something, or you've actually implemented something that is going to actually have a concrete, tangible impact on your culture and on the way that you have an impact with your community, with your clients, with your talents, and with your stakeholders and shareholders around the world. So thank you very much for all the signatories of the WEPs and all the participants in this very important survey, actually trying to push the envelope forward.
Thank you. Anthony?
Yeah, the final thing I would say is that often in the sustainability space, we refer to the sustainability journey, and it's just that. And as I said before, you don't go from 0 to 100 with nothing in between. So this WEPs survey, what we've seen today is a lot of people are on this journey somewhere. And there's always going to be people more advanced than you, and there's going to be people less advanced than you. If you're still at the 0 marker, don't worry about it. Don't be intimidated by it. Don't think that you have to do everything overnight, but just do something more than what you're doing now and start looking at quantifying things, start experimenting with some basic reporting, start at least having very basic discussions with your board members or your senior management just to sensitize them to this issue, to start thinking about it. You don't see what you don't look for. So this is, this would just be my sort of last words to people, just to encourage them to just start working their way down this this road, this sustainability journey, this gender equality journey.
Thank you, Anthony, which reminds me, we call it also the WEPs journey, because we do recognize that people are on a journey and nobody has reached the end station yet. But I also like to just reiterate before I hand it over to Miwa, Anita's point. And also what we recommend companies to do as a first step is have conversation, ask questions, talk to your employees, talk to your managers, talk to your board or governance structure or whatever you have. That is the best way to understand what are the expectations, and if there are none, then we need to shift that too, so that the governance structure or the managers understand that there are risks and opportunities involved in this. But Miwa, I think we have come just to the end of the webinar, so I'll hand it over to you. And I would just like to thank everyone, our guests today, but also all of the participants that have been contributing in the chat and in the Q&A by great questions. Thank you. Over to you, Miwa.
Oh, thank you so much. I was very busy taking notes of this great conversation we had, but I actually noticed that we haven't answered one question on women-owned businesses. And to close up, I'd like to give a kind of an anecdote from the web signatories. What we hear a lot from web signatories in male-dominant sector is that they don't find enough women talent to hire from. So similar approach to women-owned businesses, that you may want to say, oh, there's not enough capacitated women-owned business that we can procure from. So what we say to these companies is invest in their talent and invest in the training. So we actually had a airline company in South America, for instance. They couldn't find a female graduate to hire to become their pilot. So what they've done is they invested in an airline school and actually trained those women to become pilots. And they were able to select those women with credentials to become pilot and met gender parity. So you really need to think outside of box. Same logic with women-owned businesses. So try to think with that. So I wanted to add to that. And before we end, there is going to be a feedback evaluation survey before you leave. So please fill it out before you leave. But again, thank you so much. And if you didn't have a chance to read our report, please read our report. And we look forward to hearing more from you in the future. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful one. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.